Well, a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Stephen Cole. I'm honoured to be the moderator for today's webinar, the Energy Water Nexus, hosted by the Al-Attiyah Foundation in partnership with London Stock Exchange Group Data and Analytics. We'll be exploring the complex interactions, challenges and opportunities within the Energy Water Nexus. International experts will be sharing their perspectives on the synergies and trade-offs between these systems and why an integrated approach is absolutely vital to ensure resource security and, of course, what we're talking about most of all, environmental sustainability. A few housekeeping rules. For the best viewing experience, please read the instructions above the media player. For any technical issues during the webinar, please refresh the page or reach out via issuerservices@lseg.com. For any questions for the speakers, you can click on Ask a Question. Please note, in the interest of time, we may be unable to address all the questions to all the speakers. During the session, you'll be taking part in polling sessions and questions. The recording of the session will be available using the same event link. In a context, this is the third webinar of 2024, and we'll be delving into the critical relationship between energy and water resources, highlighting the, I think you'd call it, intricate interdependencies and global significance. Energy production relies heavily on water for extraction, processing, cooling, and generation, while energy operations impact water quality and availability too, of course. The environmental implications of water use in energy production, the role of policy and technology in mitigating conflicts and strategies for sustainable resource management are all very important considerations in any discourse involving energy transition and water management. They go hand in hand, don't they? As the demand for both energy and water escalates worldwide, and in the context of a global push for transition to cleaner sources of energy, this roundtable will seek, like the webinar too, of course, to uncover the complex interactions, challenges, and potential solutions within the competing imperatives of the need for clean water and clean energy too. In particular, water production in arid climates faces several significant challenges, particularly as the push for energy transition progresses. Challenges in non-arid countries are obviously less severe, but nevertheless, the production and distribution of water can be an energy-intensive process in most countries. Now, those challenges can be broadly categorized into issues related to water scarcity, water consumption, and environmental impact, technological limitations, and various socio-economic factors. And these are some of the main issues we'll be talking about in this webinar. Later this month, I think it's about 10 days' time, the UN convenes in New York City for the Summit of the Future. That's in inverted commas. Delegates will be reaffirming their commitment to the 2023 Sustainable Development Goals, which were set almost a decade ago to help improve life in the poorer countries in 6 years' time. It's not that far away, 2030. More than 70% of planet Earth is covered by water. You might say that the planet is wrongly named Earth. We should be calling it water. But the big problem, of course, is too much in one place and not enough in another. 97% of the water is salty and therefore undrinkable. Another 2% is frozen in ice caps and glaciers, so that leaves only about 1% drinking water available for billions of people around the world, and the demands will increase as those billions increase. In 2020, the WHO estimated that 2 billion people didn't have access to drinkable water. A new paper in Science suggests the real number is more like 4.4 billion. And the study concluded that vast areas of poorer countries lack the correct infrastructure to safely manage water, and all too often, and very sadly, fecal contamination, which is a major cause of infant mortality, was the issue. Although safe drinking water should have been amongst the more achievable of the SDGs, for many, it remains a pipe dream. This webinar will explore the complex interactions, challenges, and opportunities within the water energy nexus. And we're going to be hearing from those international experts who'll be sharing their perspectives on the synergies and trade-offs between these systems and why an integrated approach is very necessary to ensure resource security and environmental sustainability. As the demand for resources escalates worldwide, it's high time, I think, to make a shift from traditional sectoral thinking towards an integrated approach to resource management, one that really takes into account the water energy nexus. There is some urgency because the latest statistics I've seen, global water use is due to increase 20 to 25% by 2050, while global electricity generation is expected to increase 30% to 76% in the same year. Importantly, renewables such as solar and wind power, which require minimal water to generate electricity, are ideal investments for those regions, the drier regions facing water scarcity. They can power most types of water treatment facilities. Are they the answer? Are they the only solution? Similarly, floating PV systems can harness power while preserving precious land and water by reducing the evaporation rate of water bodies. All in all, leveraging the water energy nexus requires technological innovation, and we'll be asking about that, and cross-sector collaboration, which can hopefully yield breakthroughs in energy efficient water treatment and water efficient energy production. So you are joining us to hear from these experts who will share their perspectives on those synergies and trade-offs between the systems, and they'll be telling us why an integrated approach is so vital. So let's find out who they are. Well, we have Alicia Dauth. Alicia is a distinguished chartered environmentalist with over 15 years of expertise in environmental resource management, with the emphasis on water management and stewardship. Her career is truly global, with the emphasis basically on a global approach in the US, Southern Africa, and the Middle East, where she's played a pivotal part in implementing nature-based solutions for water conservation. Our second speaker, Gordon Edge, Head of Policy and Research, International Hydropower Association. Dr. Edge has been involved in energy throughout his career, through academia, journalism, energy advocacy, and management. He spent 13 years at Renewable UK, leading the British wind industry's policy thinking and advocacy through a remarkable period of growth. And I think you'll find, Gordon, that this is now a world leader, Britain, in such energy. The British energy industry is really motivated towards wind. He's always used high-level thinking and analysis to drive towards a low-carbon economy. Third speaker, Hans Goossens, is president of Water Europe and CEO of the Watergroep. Hans is guiding Belgium's largest public water company through a major transformation, setting up new structures and alliances to build climate resilient water services. He's a strong believer, as we all are, I hope, in innovation and cooperation. Before joining the water sector, Hans worked for 25 years in the global fertilizer industry. So those are our webinar guests and experts. And before we talk to them in a bit more detail, let's go to our first poll question. And there will be several poll questions. And there it is on your screen at the moment. What is the main challenge to adopting a water energy nexus approach? And there are the options. A, the siloed approach, stroke lack of understanding of the nexus ecosystem. B, lack of detailed data on energy sector water use. C, lack of funding for projects that generate nexus benefits. And 4, or D, environmental constraints. So if you can vote on that first poll question, and we will wait for your feedback, and you'll get the results on your screens, I think, fairly soon. I'll just check how the voting is going on my screen. Okay, everybody's on board with that. But after this, I will be asking the panel for their reaction to the results. And just to warn you, I'll probably kick off with Gordon first. So what is the main challenge to adopting a water energy nexus approach? Siloed approach, lack of understanding of the nexus ecosystem, lack of detailed data on energy sector water use, lack of funding for projects that generate nexus benefits, or environmental constraints. I know which one I would vote for personally, but it's not up to me, it's up to you. So let's hear what you have to say and see what you have to say. We have the results now. Option A, 25%. Option B, the main challenge to adopting a water energy nexus approach is a lack of detailed data on energy sector water use. That's 75%. So overwhelmingly, it's B. So Gordon, would you agree?
Well, I think that's a very interesting result. Sitting from where I am, from the energy sector in the background, there is a lot of knowledge within the energy sector of how much water we use. So, for instance, during planning processes for large power plants, the issues around how much cooling water that they might use is very much part of the process. So I think that would be, from my point of view, less a lack of information existing and more it not being transmitted across the barrier between the energy and the water sectors would be my assessment of that.
So poor communication, really. Hans, your reaction?
Well, I would say data, a lack of detailed data. We can always have more data, of course, but I'm often a bit afraid, to be honest, when I hear people talking about we need more data to take action, because we can increase the data. We can increase the data we have to refine or fine tune our actions. But for me, let's say the challenge on adopting the nexus is probably not in the data, but is in the mindset and the thinking, the system thinking, the circular thinking, instead of global linear thinking.
Okay, that's a good summary, I think. And you sound as cynical as I am, which is about data and whether it should be a lot more focused, to be honest. Alicia, your reaction to this first poll?
Well, I actually am very surprised because I also do believe that we do have sufficient data to understand, how energy and water go hand in hand. So I would have picked, if it was multiple choice, maybe it is, I would have picked A and C, because I think the transparency, so the data is there, but the transparency of that, but I don't think that there's a lack of data. I believe there's enough data for us to make those informed decisions, but I do think that the data is usually kept in segments that aren't transmitted clearly, and then that whole understanding of the nexus ecosystem, it's like a very intricate web, and I think that people tend to get lost in that web or stick on one side of that web, and then that lack of funding to be able to promote that better understanding and look at the web as a whole. So I'm surprised that the vote was with B, because I feel that we should be past that, and now we're how do we break down the barriers, how do we open up the data, and how do we work with it?
Just very quickly, Alicia, before we move on, a lack of funding by whom?
Well, I believe it could be from both sides. So when you look at the water sector, there definitely is a lack of funding, or we need more funding in the water sector. So enhancing that infrastructure, bringing in those efficient technologies, as well as technologies that can actually reduce energy and water needs. So a technology where maybe we're looking for an energy, and how can we do that with as little water as possible? And then how can we make our water infrastructure more efficient so it requires less energy? So I would say I would like to have the water sector get a little bit more benefits from funding to ensure that those projects can actually complement the energy sector as well.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go back to Gordon. Gordon, just to remind people of your title, Head of Policy and Research, International Hydropower Association. What does an integrated, holistic approach to the water energy nexus look like from where you sit?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I think to start with, I think I'd like to point out, I'm coming from an energy background. So I'm about the water use of energy rather than the energy use of water. But given that energy uses about 10% of the world's fresh water, I think this is a really important perspective. Those kind of uses we've alluded to before, things like cooling for thermal generation in the electricity sector, but also things like oil refining. It's not just electricity. Let's bear in mind, energy is a much broader topic than electricity, which provides at the moment about 20% of the world's energy in total. As we go forward, the proportion is going to increase and should increase rapidly. It's important that water is very much part of the center of this energy water nexus, given that the water is our raw material, as you might put it. But it's also the case that hydro doesn't use the water in the sense that it can't be used for something else. It is very much, you can take it, you can use it for drinking and irrigation and sanitation, all the other uses you might have for fresh water once you have produced electricity with it. So it's a really important part of that nexus. And also the fact that these multiple uses are very much, it's part of the benefit of hydro, that you can have a dam and you can use it from that water for all these multiple uses, though it does make the operation of these stations somewhat more complex. You have competing uses for the same raw material. And it does mean you have to plan very effectively. And we're planning through a very significant transition in our energy use from 80% renewables in fossil fuels in our mix to something to net zero within the next 25 years, 30 years. That's a very, very significant shift. And we're moving from a lot of fossil fuels, which in general use a lot of water, be that, like I said, cooling for thermal plant, be that oil refining, to production from wind and solar, the variable renewables, which have very low water use. Great. What you also need is the complementary firm renewables at the same time, prime of which is hydropower. And we're back to the use of water here. But we're going to have a different role for water. Rather than hydro producing just kind of bulk megawatt hours, it's going to be in partnership and complementary to those wind and solar resources. It'll be providing the flexibility that we need. So you might have more capacity of hydro, but you may be using less water for the services that are needed. So we need to think about that energy supply in the round and what the water is that it's going to be used for. We anticipate by 2050 you need to double the hydropower capacity that we're going to have needed in the world in order to meet the net zero objectives. But that may be being used for less energy. And then you're situated, you're using more water for electricity through hydro, but you are using less water in the entire energy sector overall. I think this can be a win-win-win. Lastly, I think it's really important to note that in a changing climate, water resources are getting more variable. We can see that the hydro generation has been very much impacted by droughts in the last couple of years. But this year it's a much more generation as water has come back. So we're going to need a lot more water management infrastructure. We already have a gap in engineered water storage rather. Going forward, and we'll need to build more of it. If you're building a dam and a reservoir, why not build a powerhouse at the same time? And therefore you get extra benefit out of that same investment. So I think there's a real need to think of the energy and water systems in tandem, and the fact we're moving from energy using water in one way to energy using water in another, but we can have a benefit for this energy nexus as a result. And I think that's really important. Think about tandem, plan, the water, the function of using water for power changes.
So do you think we're planning far enough ahead to mitigate the effects of climate change? I'm thinking particularly of infrastructure.
I think the jury is out on that one. Certainly, when it comes to hydropower, we can see a significant pipeline of projects coming down the track. Whether they are engineered for the dual uses that we need, I think there's an adage, you manage what you measure, but also you get what you pay for. So if you don't pay for it, you don't get it. And at the moment, people who are developing hydro projects are faced with a situation. They may have these multiple uses, but they may not be paid in effectively. So you can't judge between them. Is, well, how much am I going to emphasize drinking water supply, and how much am I going to generate electricity from this, and how do I judge the balance between those? Well, you have to be paid effectively, but I think we haven't got ourselves in a position where these projects are remunerated across the whole spectrum of services they provide to allow you to design your project and the operation of it in such a way as to be most efficient and effective.
So effectively, it's not an integrated approach as yet. Let's go to Hans. Just to remind you, Hans Goossens is president of Water Europe. Hans, what do you see the next steps to be, the next challenges in the water nexus?
I think probably the biggest challenge in the nexus is that we start from thinking of looking into the nexus, starting from system thinking and sector thinking. We're asking ourselves, where should we look into the energy savings, and then we make water savings, or should we look into water savings and then we make energy savings? Because we are used to let's say, be very silo thinking way. I'm working for a public water company. I'm president of Water Europe. We talk a lot about water, but we realize that actually water is part of a system, and in nature, water is part of a natural nexus where energy and food and material are all interconnected. We made them into different systems, but actually, by nature, water and energy and material is just one. And by, let's say, we have been through a globalization modus where we are very much thinking on the large scale and looking into solutions of one size fits all. I think now we need to add this local approach. If we look into problems on an average, then the problem is not probably as big as it is when we look into local. We see that climate change has made, for instance, drought and rain very much more variable, not only on a time scale, but also on a local scale. And that means for me that the biggest challenge in this nexus, energy water nexus, is that we need to come to this mind shift and look into local ecosystem where water and energy are just linked to each other by nature, and not that we need to think about how we bring systems together. They are together by nature.
Well, just to back up your point, I've got a note I made, funny enough, this morning. The UN reckons in the last 20 years of flooding affected more than 1 billion people. It killed 100,000 people and caused economic losses of over $830 billion. Droughts in the same period affected 1.4 billion, killed over 20,000, and cost $170 billion. So these are massive effects on the global economies, aren't they? It's clearly a place, as I said in the introduction, of too much water in one place and not enough in another. Are there ideas big enough around the world to help redress the balance?
Our ideas big enough? I think we all have ideas, but there also needs to be a sense of urgency. And I think, let's say, the models predicting these climate changes, they are from decades back. But it's only when we see the effect, when we see these floodings, these large fires also, when we see that people are seeing the effect of extended periods of droughts. And you say, well, we see local differences, but it's not only local. I think, for instance, here I'm living in Belgium. We have gotten now, for 12 consecutive months, the wettest months we ever had. Just after we had the 2 years of the largest droughts we ever had. Meaning that it's not only a local variation, it's also a variation in time. Regions which are now fighting against flood might be fighting against drought from 2 years from now. That means solutions we are implementing should address the total system and should not just look into just one problem. And I think there, again, if we look into and understand how nature functions, a lot can be solved by copying nature or by implementing nature-based solutions. And that will benefit both the energy need and energy consumption, as well as the whole water management.
Let's get to Alicia, because I know, Alicia, you want to comment on this, don't you?
Yes, I absolutely do, because I mean, I think there's some great points there, Hans, but also I believe that we get a little bit blurred when it comes to the environmental impact of a lot of this, because we can't replace water. All right. And the thing is, energy, we have options. We've got different ways we can maybe harness energy. But water is that one resource that there's nothing else that can replace it. Now, of course, I know that once it goes through the energy sector, we can reuse it. It's not that it goes to that and then we can't use it again. However, the environmental impact that also comes with that, I think people tend to maybe forget that there's limitations on how far we can push nature, and we can harness it, and we can sort of adapt with it. We can enhance it, we can restore it. But is that going to be good enough? Because just as much as we're restoring areas, then in other areas we're urbanizing it. And then, we've got other events, extreme events, like we talked about. Water is very destructive. It causes a lot of destruction. And are we able to how can we revive that environment and use it and restore it for what we need? At the same time, it's also being impacted from natural events related to climate change, for example. And so it's not just about sort of being actionable, it's about responding. We're to the point now, we sort of know what's happening. We're putting mitigations, but it's now that response time, I think, is becoming that piece that we should be looking forward to. How are we going to respond to this? Okay, we know this and this can happen. How are we going to actually respond to this, whether it's in 2 years or 5 years?
I hosted a roundtable yesterday on water and energy nexus. The UN is starting to wake up to this as well. I think a bit late in the day, but gradually the world is waking up to the importance of water and its various uses and how it's disappearing and it's not being reused. But Alicia, you believe that perhaps there is enough water, but it's not being reused properly. Would that be fair?
I think definitely there is enough water, but like you pointed out already, it's not always where we want it to be. It's not always of the quality that we need it at. And then, of course, treatment comes at a high cost. And then, getting the infrastructure in place to treat it, depending on what it needs to be treated for, intended on what its use is. So I believe that we don't have, of course, we do have a water problem, but most of the problem comes from it's not getting to those who need it. It's not getting in the quality it needs. Environmental flows aren't what they used to be. So nature isn't getting what it needs to also do its job. So, we the water is what becomes quite siloed. That water resource, we've sort of packaged it up, we divert it store it where we want, we navigate it where we want. Everything is how we want it, kind of losing on what nature really wants, and how to use water for. And that's my concern from that environmental perspective on how we making sure that everybody is getting enough of that water, because the environment needs just as much water as we need for all of our operations as well. So this is why environmental constraints, from the opening poll question, that wasn't one of my top, but it definitely is one of sort of that challenge, I think, that feeds into what is the challenge on the water energy nexus.
Indeed, especially in the more arid areas of the world, that problem still hasn't been solved sufficiently. But I want to go. I think it's time to take another poll question, unless anybody would like to come back to Alicia. Okay, well, do that after the poll question. You can see it on your screen. Which follows up basically on some of the points Alicia was making. What is the biggest obstacle facing water suppliers today? And there are your options. The aging infrastructure. This is probably sort of not quite as divisive as the first poll. Energy costs, B. Water contamination, C. And population fluctuation, D. So there are your options. What is the biggest obstacle facing water suppliers today? Aging infrastructure, energy costs, water contamination, and population fluctuation. And this time I'll come back to Alicia first once we get the results, and we'll then go to Gordon and Hans. I think I know which way this is going to go, to be honest. Aging infrastructure. I think it's probably a mixture of all four, personally, but you can't. That is not an option if you're voting. It must be for one of those: A, B, C, or D. And when I come back, I mean, we're talking water risks and regulation, and we'll just go back to that point of water reuse in the energy sector. What to do with wastewater. As we all know, there are some good, funny stories about people using grey water to brew beer, a pint of shower water, please, and many other reuses of wastewater. No doubt the Belgians would not be doing that with their tradition of Belgian beer, or maybe they are. Who knows? We'll find out in a moment. But let's find out. Let's have a look at what the voters have been saying. And this should come up very soon. Okay, yeah, as I thought, it's not quite as divisive as last time. Alicia, the second poll, A, 17%, B, 33%, C, 33%, D, 17%. So pretty close between the four, isn't it? And equal B and C and A and D. What do you think?
So I definitely think we should have been given all options, all of the above. That was always my favorite one, doing my exams in school, because I had a shot. But I really, if I were to rate it, I would say that they're all obstacles. But I do believe that D is actually probably the biggest obstacle. And why I believe that, because I know I was just talking about water quality and contamination. That of course is a big problem. But the more that our population grows, they demand more water, right? And then industries grow, everything grows, and then our water demand. So the population really directly impacts what we need, and that also deteriorates the water quality from that population growth as we urbanize, as we develop our built environments. Our energy costs, I think that it's not a huge obstacle for water suppliers, because I think there's a means to finding alternative energy costs associated with it. That's not to say it's not an obstacle, but I wouldn't rank it as a top one. But aging infrastructure, that's because it hasn't been catered to allow for some of the projected growth as well. So I would also sort of mark that a little bit lower down my list. Of course, it is a huge problem, but infrastructure, it's not that it's just old, that's one part, but also it can't cope with large amounts of volumes that are needing to remediate, clean the water, as well as distribute it back out. So I have to go with mine as being D, that the population, we're just, perpetuating all the other problems that are stemming from obstacles in the water supply.
Okay, Hans, your reaction? Energy costs and water contamination is thought to be more important than A and D.
I think first of all, let's say the answer to this question will very much depend also on which part of the world you are looking at. I think if we would look into this question just from a Western European point of view, probably aging infrastructure would be ranked higher. But for me, in general, I would say it's the adoption of the system to the changing need and context. And I explain myself. Indeed, in regions where you see a tremendous increase in population and more urbanization, you need to make sure that you have the water available. But also in regions where you have the population pressure and the pressure from human activities, you have let's say the contamination of the water, which we definitely see also in Western Europe. And we see also that there is the increasing trend of reuse of water. There is the awareness of the people who is raising about water consumption and to be very sustainable water use. That means that the net consumption per capita is decreasing, which is good news. But with, let's say, in established populations with old infrastructure, that means that it's not just a question of aging infrastructure, but it's also a question of, let's say, infrastructure which is not fully fit anymore to the changing pattern, consumption pattern.
Okay. Gordon, your reaction?
Yeah, so I'm going to do some violent agreement in some ways with my fellow panelists, certainly with Alicia in terms of the point about energy costs. Energy costs have been high recently because we're still very dependent on fossil fuels, and they tend to be the marginal cost and set the overall price. So in the electricity sector, I guess fired power plants, the gas is very expensive. The gas-fired power plant sets the price for everyone else, and everybody pays a lot of money. So as we go forward, there will be an increasing amount of low carbon energy, particularly renewables, low marginal cost in the system, going to bring the energy price down. Water suppliers could benefit through direct investment in this. So are they going to be able to have their own energy generation infrastructure? On reservoirs, we have the option for floating solar power, which is really interesting. One, you can use an existing infrastructure. Two, because it does reduce the amount of evaporation, you reduce the water loss, but also that actually cools the solar panels, and they are actually more efficient as a result. So it might cost a bit more to put them on floaters out on over water, but you do get an energy benefit out of it. So I think, and I would agree that energy shouldn't be the issue going forward. It might be right now, but not going forward. And where I'm agreeing with Hans is that the infrastructure, I think, is very much one we need to be paying attention to, and not just because it's getting old. The climate is changing, and that's putting different pressures on the infrastructure. My members are finding. Well, for instance, we're finding we have a climate resilience guide for our members for people to invest in their existing infrastructure to make it more resilient to the difficulties. Either if there's less water, but if there's more water, you might have to heighten the dam, or make it stronger. These are all issues that people with existing assets have to address. And also, if you're planning for a new asset, you have to think, well, what's the water resource going to look like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time? Because these are very long life assets. That's a real conundrum. You have to design in some pretty serious margin for error in there. So I think infrastructure is going to be a much bigger issue than our audience are indicating.
That's absolutely right. And as Hans says, depending, of course, on where you live. Gordon, just before we go to a third poll, just to ask you, solar and wind power require minimal water, don't they, to generate power? Are they the ideal investments for regions facing water scarcity? I'm talking obviously about the more arid regions and therefore the poorer regions.
Well, the thing is, it's not just poorer or arid regions, because they're now, by some way, the cheapest new technology you can get. They are utterly dominating the market for new power generation in most places. So, and in particular, the absolutely precipitous drop in the cost of solar power, which isn't actually slowing that much, is driving people towards it. Now, the problem you have with wind and solar is the variability of their resource. Sun shines in the day, doesn't at night. Wind sometimes blows, sometimes it doesn't. You know, this is the issue that has been thrown at me forever when I'm an advocate.
And then, of course, the next issue is storage.
But storage and also complementary resources. So hydro, very good in terms of, well, it's just storing stuff behind a dam, and that provides a form of storage. Whereas pumped storage is when you take water and stick it uphill when you've got excess energy. That's also going through a massive renaissance around the world. You look at China, for instance, they're moving. They've got now about 50 gigawatts of pumped storage, and they've got an aim for 120 by 2030. And if any country is going to meet those kind of targets, it'll be China. But we're seeing much more interest in that technology all over the world. Which I think is a really important development going forward.
That's another question, isn't it? Fossil fuels and energy nexus. But I just want to go to the third poll, because we have 4 polls in all, but I'd like to do this third one because I want to move on to what will save us all, perhaps, and that's technology and innovation. So which technology process will enable more water reuse in the future? And I will go to Alicia for, of course, for reaction to this poll. Capturing water from air by pulling water from fog, dew and mist. Transforming rain into a local freshwater source. Recycling grey water, which we've mentioned, for non-potable purposes. And also, I suppose, recycling water from the oil and gas industry, massive amounts, and the IT industry that use billions of gallons of water to cool their servers. And often those servers are based in the most arid regions of America, which is a strange place to put them, but there must be economic reasons for that. But they do use a lot of water. And some people complain they're not charged enough, but then that brings the issue of how much do you charge for water? How much does water cost? And of course, that's something that Hans will be thinking about, and utilities. But anyway, the question is, which technology process will enable more water reuse in the future? Capturing water from air by pulling water from fog, dew and mist, the nature's way, transforming rain into local fresh water, into a local freshwater source, and recycling grey water for non-potable purposes. And I'm sure I don't need to explain what that means, is not for drinking water. So those are the 3 options, not 4 this time. Again, I think I can predict, and I'm sure you 3 can as well. Yep, as I thought. What's your guess? Well, I won't ask you your guess because we haven't got time for guess games. Well, Alicia, option B, 67%. Transforming rain into a local freshwater source. Second is option A, capturing water from air by pulling water from fog, dew, and mist. Your reaction?
That's surprising. So both A and C are two technology processes that are actually happening here in the UAE. So for example, up here in our mountain range, they are only collecting water. It's on the market. We drink it sometimes. So they're doing that already. Sort of the air, can't remember the exact name, is doing this exact thing. So this is already happening, and it's becoming just that alternative on the market at the moment for a drinking water source. And then C, that's something that's already happening. There's a few energy cooling sectors here in the UAE, IEMA cool, and there are.
Why did so few people? Nobody has voted for C.
Yeah, I'm surprised because that's in the UAE. We've had the target to reuse 99% of our grey water for non-potable purposes in the next few years, and we're on track for that as well. So I'm quite surprised that that doesn't come up because that has been a big one, as well as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They're also looking into that from other sites. It just makes a lot more sense for them, especially for the capital in Riyadh, obviously, because trying to get desalinated water into some of these remote areas is difficult. So they're looking to, the recycling of it. So for me, I would say A and C would be the most prominent ones that I've seen happening here.
Just before I go down, Gordon, just 1 second. Just Alicia, is desalination really only an option for richer countries?
I don't believe so. I think the RO technology is getting a bit more affordable now as it becoming more efficient. I've seen there's loads of new companies out there that are actually driving this to, the selection of the membranes depending on, the environments. I think it's definitely something that'll be affordable for countries, not just the Middle East.
So Hans?
Yes, because interestingly enough, if I look into the region where I live, Belgium, Central Europe, B is definitely, which is the highest on top ranking. It's funny actually to see that it is defined as transforming rain into a local freshwater source. I think rain is a local freshwater source. It does not need to be transformed, but it is just to be used as a local freshwater source. And actually, in Flanders, the part of Belgium where I am living, there is already for more than 20 years a directive which forces people, households, to collect rainwater. And gradually, the legislation has strengthened that the rainwater is not only collected in order to avoid flooding, but that the rainwater is also used for applications at toilet flushing and others. And that has resulted to the fact that the consumption of potable water, of tap water in Flanders, has been reduced from 120, 130 liters per capita per day to now less than 80 liters per capita per day. And we see actually, when looking further ahead, that this could be further reduced even to lower than 50 liters per capita per day.
This is a question of mainly Western governments, but do you think only governments should own utilities like water, so that would make them more accountable, whereas shareholders just want to make money, don't they?
That is let's say water is a need for living, is a question of living. There is also water use, which is rather, let's say, you could call it luxury or comfort, but water is actually a basic human right. Access to water and sanitation is a basic human right. And to make sure that it is accessible to everyone, I think to one extent or the other, public and government need to play a role here. But they can play a role in different ways, of course. But if I look into Europe, where let's say, a lot of the water supply is run by public companies. I think there it is important to have the role of a water regulator, which makes sure that, let's say, efficiency measures are taken let's say, instead of having a market competition to increase the efficiency, that there is a water regulator which is looking after that.
Well, there's a water regulation in the UK, but water companies seem to have a great distance from the regulator operations. So it's a good theory. But anyway, so we don't want to get bogged down in utilities. But I do wonder whether you can put a cost on water, because it seems to me that sensible water pricing is as rare as it is necessary. Do water users in Belgium realize or understand how their money is being spent?
All the information is there to understand how it is being spent. Let's say in Belgium, in Flanders, actually the water tariff is very much an integrated water tariff. So people pay for tap water as well as for the wastewater collection and the wastewater purification. Oh. And that is all by different slices in the tariff, and it is made clear to what part is meant for what. Actually, the tariff scheme is very much on a variable rate on water consumption, which means that now that water consumption is decreased, that puts, let's say, the economic model for the utility companies quite under pressure, because the cost is quite a fixed nature.
Okay, and of course Belgium has enough rainwater to utilize all that.
No. We might think so the last 12 months, but actually Belgium is relatively water scarce. And that is related to the fact that there are no long rivers, no big lakes. And actually, when it is raining, Belgium has in the past put a lot of focus on flood avoiding floods. So that means that the rainwater is relatively quickly drained to the sea.
I wonder if that's because of farming practices, because as we know, farming has a big impact on water use and is one of the biggest users. But I want to go to the fourth pole before we talk about the water uses. And what is the most influential factor in the water energy sector due to new capacities of technology? What is the most influential factor in the water nexus water energy nexus? And for this, I'll come to Gordon first on the back of this. Adjusted demand for the final products of the water energy sector, for example, due to new capacity of technology, competition for shared resources, such as land, which, well, just talking to Hans about it really, and external factors, such as the effects of climate change, environmental degradation, and I suppose I can't quite read the rest of that poll question, but I think it's political situations. It certainly is political situations. So there you are. Those are the choices. The most influential factor in the water energy nexus: adjusted demand for final products, competition for shared resources such as land, external factors such as the effects of climate change, environmental degradation, and political situations. Those are your choices. Again, I think on the panel we will be pretty sure of what the answer to this one is, but we are asking you, the voters, to tell us what you think. The most influential factor in the water nexus. And when we come back on the back of this, I'll be asking Gordon, in fact, what are the key factors leveraging the water power nexus. So the result, ladies and gentlemen, overwhelmingly C. In external factors such as the effects of climate change, environmental degradation, and political situations, which you could, all three, you could use for almost any of the questions we've asked today, to be honest. But Gordon, your reaction?
Can't say I'm surprised. Certainly, when it comes to hydropower, the impact of climate change is a massive issue for our sector. And increasingly, it's true in energy, it's true in water. Politics is always going to be part of the mix. It's, you know, in my own country here in the UK, water and sewage is a massive political issue. So I think we can never discount any of that. However, I'd come back to what I was saying in my kind of answer to your initial question way back about the holistic planning. Demand for the final products is going to be changing very significantly. How much energy from water. So hydropower, like I said, is going to change quite significantly, and the quality of that will be changing. There will be a different demand for the water itself. If there is greater drought, then irrigation is going to be a much larger demand. So that's going to be a big issue going forward.
Okay, and Alicia, very briefly, your reaction to this poll?
Yes, I'll also go with C. I definitely believe, because I think B can easily be something that, you know, if you're looking at it from a water stewardship approach, we're going to need to, you know, share our responsibilities within where our catchment is, where our sites are. I don't think that's going to be a factor. I think it's definitely going to be all those external factors that we can't control.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up unless anybody has something to say in 15 seconds. Right. Okay, good. Well, you've all been outstanding, very carefully phrased responses. We didn't talk about the world's oceans. This year has been a pretty bleak one. In March, the UN reported around half the world's population experiences severe water scarcity too. So that's another big issue. I just want to thank you for attending this webinar series supported by the Al-Attiyah Foundation in partnership with London Stock Exchange Group Data and Analytics. We certainly look forward to welcoming you to future webinars. Can I encourage you all to fill out the post-event survey, which will be shown on the screen? There it is. You can scan the QR code for the survey. It's very easily done. And you can be filled in on the same event page as well. We've had a brilliant discussion from our energy stakeholders, harnessing the synergies between water and energy. We've talked about the integrity of land, the environment, and ecosystems. There is a lot more to talk about, but in the meantime, from Alicia, Gordon, and Hans, and from me, Stephen Cole, thank you very much indeed for tuning in to this webinar on the Energy Water Nexus.